Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you're joining us, whether you're in your living room right now, you're watching, driving to work, whether you're in LA or Boise, Idaho, we just want to say welcome. Thank you for joining us in this journey. So, at Ethos, if you're new, this is what we do every week. We take the Bible and we dissect it, we move through, we ask really deep, important questions of the text. And so we realize at Ethos, this book we call the Bible, specifically right now, Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. We take those 5 books and we delve really deeply in them. And we ask the questions: who was the author? Who was the audience? When was it written? Why was it written? We ask questions of the actual words. What did these words mean? Understanding words. Today we'll kind of delve into some of those, but words like names or cities oftentimes have a lot of metaphorical meaning. And so in a 21st century reading, we'll miss some of that. And so in Ethos, what we do is we want to delve into that text. We want to look at the logos of the text, right? Then we want to look at the philosophical moments of the text, the ethos, the main points of it. And then we want to move through, again, how do we deal with it today? How do we pathos, right? How do we move through this text and say, what does it mean for me? And so we do all of that really difficult work right here during the study. So we've been moving through the book of Genesis for a while, and Genesis has brought up some really cool concepts. And again, I've had many people say, how are we only on chapter 38, right? It's been years almost, right? And again, the reason we do this is because we want to take it seriously. If I told you that most Jewish rabbis, when they're studying the book of Genesis, they are taking 2 to 4 years to study the text. 2 to 4 years. So that means when they're studying with a student, they are literally moving through just a couple sentences. And they'll take hours to discuss it, pray about it, look at word for word, all the different commentaries. That's what they do. And so for me, I want to be responsible with the text and do my very best as someone who's been studied Hebrew, studied how to view texts responsibly. I want to do as much of that responsible work as I can. And so that's what we'll be doing again. And so today, reminder, this book of Genesis was not meant to be a history book. The book of Genesis, written in 587, or compiled, I should say, 587 BC, the reason, again, for the compilation was so that they had a written response to the fears that they might assimilate. So they didn't want to actually have the Babylonian gods, the Babylonian rituals. They didn't want those things. They wanted to keep Judaism kosher. And so to do that, again, they take all of those stories, all of the warnings from kings, priests, prophets, all of that, and they compile it all into Torah, and they pass it on to their future generations. And again, the reason being so that they can hold on to their identity. And so that's the reason, not a history book, not to give you perfectly set dates, names, places, all these things. Much of this you're going to find there's a lot of symbolism, a lot of metaphor. And when you try to turn it into literal, it gets a little weird. And so that's why, again, as we study, we understand there's something deeper going on in every text, and usually it's Israel miniaturized through every one of the tellings. Most of the people significantly are going to refer back to who Israel is. So today we're going to delve into chapter 38. Now, warning, 38, I told you we're going to delve into the story of Joseph, right? Fair warning here. After chapter 37, right, he's in the hole and now he's going to Potiphar's home. There's this weird insertion. And truth be told, most people skip this. VeggieTales, when you look at the felt board animations that people often do, this is often skipped. When you think of the story of Joseph, you do not typically think of this story. And this is the reason why we're going to spend a little time on it. We're going to break it up into 2 sections. And so there's going to be a brief pause from the story of Joseph, which, again, not a story about a kid with just a fancy coat, right? It's actually the story of Israel. It's Israel going through the highs and the lows, Israel learning how to be Israel in the middle of famine and plenty, right? Israel in the middle of captivity and then freedom. That's the deeper picture here. So let's move into it. This is going to be the story of Judah, Tamar, and Onan. And so you're going to hear these names in a few minutes. The idea here with Judah is something much deeper. And so I think Hans-Georg Wunsch, he wrote this huge paper over this. And it's gotten a lot of reading whenever people discuss this story, theologians at least, Christian theologians mainly. Hans-Georg Wunsch, he is brought up over and over again. And so I had to read the piece, 17 long pages of like heavy text, and then of course 20 plus pages of references. It's a really in-depth study over this specific section of the story of Joseph. And so as I was reading, I found this gem, and I would argue probably the most important piece of what Hans-Georg Wunsch says here. So let me read it to you, and it'll kind of give you an idea as we step into this story, because it can get a little weird when you literalize it or you turn it into something that's not. So here, let me read this first. The question behind these chapters is, which of the sons of Jacob will take over the right to promulgature, the step into the line of blessing coming down from Abraham? So who's going to be in charge, basically, right? That's the idea here. So will it be Judah, next in line after his brother Reuben, Simeon and Levi, who for various reasons lost the right of the promulgature, I can never say that word, or Joseph, the firstborn of Rachel? So in this respect, Genesis 38 shows how Judah began to transform from a very egocentric person, willing to sell his brother Joseph into slavery, into someone willing to become a slave in the place of his brother Benjamin. This transformation qualifies Judah to become the leader amongst his brothers, while Joseph would receive the double portion as his right of being the firstborn. So, setting it up for you from the get-go. This is a story about Judah. And so Judah is going to make some mistakes in this story. Judah, however, is going to begin a transformation. And so Judah, just like Joseph, has a bit of a transformation. And some have even argued that the story of Joseph is kind of like the bookend, but the main story here is really about how Judah transforms and how Joseph is actually, he never really changes through the story, some argue. Some actually argue that it's Judah who is actually the main character of the story, which is like, what? A little bit weird to think about. I'm not saying that is the case, but I am saying it's an interesting take on it, isn't it? To say that this is actually the story of Judah and how Judah went from ego maniac to the person at the end who says, take my brother, or take me instead of my brother, right? An interesting shift on the story. And so some would argue, again, this is why Joseph is kind of in the middle of the story, whereas Judah is kind of the bookends of the story. Interesting, right? Just something to think about. So we're going to delve in. So let me read to you verses 1 through 11. So here we go. Now it came about at that time that Judah was demoted by his brothers. And he turned away until he came upon an Edomite man named Hira. And there Judah saw the daughter of a merchant named Shua. And he took her and came to her. And she conceived and bore a son, and he named him And she conceived again and bore a son, and she named him Onan. Notice it always comes in threes, right? These names. Once again, she bore a son, and she named him Shelah. And he, Judah, was in Chezib when she gave birth to him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, named Tamar. Now Judah's firstborn, was evil in the eyes of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Yeah. So Judah said to Onan, come to your brother's wife and perform the rite of the Levirate and raise up progeny for your brother. Basically, get him a son. Right? Since your brother's gone, get him a son. Have sex with her, right? Now Onan knew that the progeny would not be his, And it came about when he came to his brother's wife, he wasted his semen on the ground in order not to give seed to his brother. Yeah, you won't find this in most children's stories, right? Now, what he did was evil in the eyes of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Remain as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he said, lest he die too, like his brothers. So Tamar went, and she remained in the father's house. So, interesting story, right? And some of you, I know you're like, oh, I do vaguely remember the story, right? Couldn't remember maybe Onan or some of the characters involved, but the story, many people will kind of say, oh, I do vaguely remember this. So here we go. Let's look at it. Now it came about that time, verse 1, that Judah was demoted by his brothers. His brothers. So notice this. Rashi says it great here. Our medieval rabbi, he says this: why was this section placed here where it interrupts the section dealing with Joseph? To teach us that Judah's brothers demoted him from his high position where they saw their father's distress. They said, "You told us to sell him. Had you told us to return him, we would have obeyed you." So the idea here, they demote him. They demote him because he does the thing they secretly wanted to do. And yet you need a fall guy, don't you? We talked about scapegoats last week, right? You need a fall guy. And of course, the oldest is going to be your fall guy, right? You're older, you should have known better. This is what happens here. The older, unfortunately, gets the blessings and the curses. Yeah. And so again, if you're Israel and you're reading this, of course, you're connecting the dots, right? The larger nation, Judah, this nation is going to get the curses and the blessings, right? It's going to have the blessings of wealth, prosperity, but also it's going to be constantly warring with other nations. There's a lot here that if you were an Israelite, you would have been picking up on. Let's keep going. He turned away until he came to an Adullamite man named Hira. So the name Hira here, this is kind of interesting. The word here means a shift. Yeah, a shift, a change. So if you read on, notice this: Hira, a shift, a change, and then you get to this daughter he notices, Shua. So a shift, a change, Shua means prosperity. So if you're Hebraic and you're reading this, you're not reading Shua, you're not reading these names, you're reading these actual words. They have these meanings. So what happens here is you would be reading it like this. And I like to do this periodically, remind you, this is not our language, it's theirs, right? And this is how they would read it up here, right? Intellectually, this is how this would look. He experienced a shift and found prosperity. Yeah, he begins to experience a shift. He begins to move into prosperity, blessing. Is he there yet? Well, no, but there is a shift, and he's beginning to shift and change a bit. Is he where he's supposed to be? No, absolutely not, and we'll find that out in a minute. But there is this shift moving towards prosperity. Again, interesting. This is how a Hebrew would read it. Verse 2, notice this. He sees this merchant's daughter, Shua. He takes her and came to her. Now, whenever I read these pieces, I will delve into all the different commentaries. And I have to tell you, many, many people don't like this text, specifically right here. Many feminist writings will say, see, the Bible needs to be thrown out, right? There's all this patriarchal rape, men just taking what they want, very tribal. We need to do away with this book. Get it out of the libraries. Get it out of children's hands. Here's my response, a very simple one. While I agree we should not live like this now, we've learned, we've moved in an ethic. I agree with you. What I always respond with, though, is this, and it's very simple. This was the culture of that time period. We can't change the past, can we? We can learn from it, but this is how life was, right? Women's value came from how many children they bore, specifically male children, right? And so when we look back, I save my judgment for those people because I understand they were on an ethic. And as we move through this specific text today, you'll see their ethic was actually much higher than many other tribes of that time. But it's shifts, it's tiny shifts and tiny movements that is going to cause huge ethical changes later on. But it's these tiny ones that are so important that we'll look at today. Are they there yet? No. But does that mean we throw out the Bible? Absolutely not. The idea here is, yes, he took her, right? He impregnated her. He saw her, he wanted her, he took her. That's the idea of the text. And that is simply how tribal people during that ancient time lived. Let's keep going. All right. And she conceived again. And she conceived and bore a son, and he named him And then notice this. Later on, she bears another son, Onan. So again, meaning means watchful. Onan means powerful. Yeah, so this is interesting when you consider the various interpretations of this. One voice just before Jesus, very popular at that time, he is quoted by saying something really interesting about Judah's journey here, which I find really fascinating. He says this, and Onan, Judah grows from an ignorant child to an enlightened adult. So this is Hillel, and this is Jesus quotes Hillel probably the majority of the time. Remember the deeper idea here. This is about Israel. So Israel is going to grow as a nation. It's going to take time, and so they're going to be the ignorant child, right? They're going to be the arrogant older son who thinks they can just do whatever they want. But at some point, ignorant, egotistical child is going to run into some hardships, is going to have some humble pie, and at some point, Israel, the older child, is going to have to wake up and take responsibility. That's what Hillel says about Judah. Yeah, kind of interesting. So it continues. Once again, she bore a child. She named him Shelah, and he, Judah, was in Shizib when she gave birth to him. So watch this now. Shelah, again, prosperity, journey, shifts, changes. This is Shelah. But Shizib is interesting. This happens, she gave birth to him. Judah was in Shizib. So while all of the blessings are happening, all of the powerful shifts, the prosperity, the changes, all these things, Judah is living in a place called Shizib. And Shizib, of course, is going to have a meaning, right? They all do. So Shizib is this idea of deceit. There's going to be a bump in the road. That's the idea of Shizib. So all these blessings are happening, but foreshadowing in the story, any Hebraic reader would know this when they hear Shizib. It tells the reader, look, we're about to experience some problems. We're about to experience some brokenness. There's going to be some deceit. It's about to walk in. We're about to have some drama. That's the idea of Shizib. So let's keep going. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, named Tamar. So here's where it starts to get interesting. Judah, again, like any father during that time, he's going to find a wife for his son. And of course, they're going to kind of barter between the families until the agreement's going to be made. All of this is kind of understood in that time period. And so Tamar, right? Has Tamar. But here's the problem. Verse 7. Judah's firstborn, it says, was evil in the eyes of the Lord. And the Lord put him to death. So there's the drama now, right? Judah's son is a terrible person, right? And so terrible that apparently God has to just smite him. And so terrible that basically some interpretations say he was stealing cattle. Others say he was misusing power, worshiping other idols. Whatever it is, apparently he's going the wrong direction, and God decides to smite him. So I want to take a moment here. This picture always gets me. This picture of the divine, right? Always a middle-aged white man, gray hair, pointing. So this moment for me, this idea, God smites him, it always begs a question. I always want to take a moment because the character of God is very important to me still. And so the idea here is God literally, the divine literally stopping and saying, you're bad, I'm going to murder you. Is that literally what happens? Is that why people get sick and die today? Is that why people get into car accidents because they're evil and God's smiting them? Well, short answer is no. No. Jewish understanding actually evolved. And so what you'll find when you understand the Jewish perspective is that yes, for a while it was very tribal, and that's how they viewed the divine. But as they have grown and shifted and evolved in their understanding, they actually view the divine as this. We live in a world that is full of freedom. And for the world to be a world, it needs to be free. And so the idea for Judaism is this. Bad things happen and good things happen. Blessings fall on good people and bad people. Conversely, bad things happen to good people and bad people. And it's not the divine that causes those things. For Judaism today, the idea is that God is not found in the blessing or the cursing. Where God is found the most is when someone pulls out of the blessing or the cursing. It's what they do with the blessing or the curses. That's where the divine guides and walks with you the most. That's where the divine shows up the most. And often it's in community. And so this idea of the divine literally like, "Wah, you're a bad error, I'm going to kill you," that's a very tribal idea that Judaism has actually left behind. And I'm hoping and praying that Christianity does the same thing. Yeah, we'll keep going. Verse 8. So Judah said to Onan, "Come to your brother's wife and perform the rite of the Levirate and raise up progeny for your brother." So to make this very clear, what's happening here, again, for first century people, this would seem very strange, right? My brother just died, so I'm going to take his wife now and she's going to be mine and I'm going to impregnate her. That would seem weird to us today, right? That'd seem very weird. For them, though, this answer of what to do when your brother dies with their wife, it's actually much deeper. And so here's the idea behind this. Jewish law was clear during Judah's time. If a woman loses her husband, the brother would take care of her, give her children, and marry her into the family home. Judaism's central tenet has always been the welfare of community. I love this. So beautiful. Again, it had nothing to do with like barbarically taking this woman as your own. Like, finally, I get Jesse's girl, whatever. That was not the point. This was literally a mechanism to keep women safe. That was the concept there. During that time, if a woman in this tribe lost their husband, there was a very real possibility. If you were in any other tribe, you would lose all your freedom. You would lose all of your blessings. The husband's family would take everything, even sometimes your children, and you would be desolate, right? You would have absolutely nothing. Many of these women would actually go into prostitution, right? They would become temple prostitutes often because it's the only thing they could do of value anymore. And so what's fascinating to me is Israel is saying, no. We need to take care of these women. These women are humans too. And so again, think about the ethic that we're on here. To all my friends who want to throw the Bible out, I want to just say this simply. They were on this incredible ethic. They were moving at a pace that most tribes were not. And I would argue because the divine was showing them over and over again this beautiful picture of what it looks like to be more and more human. How to take care of each other in community. What a beautiful picture. Yeah, we'll keep going. Now, Onan knew that the progeny would not be his. And it came about when he came to his brother's wife, he wasted his semen on the ground in order not to give seed to his brother. So, Onan, fully aware that he's supposed to take care of his brother's wife, right? He's supposed to value her, love her, take care of her. But this is what Onan does here. Rather than help restore her, rather than find a way to make sure she's taken care of, that she has value again, that she's able to have a son, and she goes back up into the family ladder, all of these things, instead of bringing that joy to her, he wastes it. He thinks of himself only. And again, he misses the experience of community. And so some have like oddly made this like about the evils of like masturbation, or, if you do this, you're going to die. Onan is the picture of like what you do or don't do with your semen, whatever. Not about the liquid, any of that. That is a weird misinterpretation, right? That was never the point. The point was he knew he was supposed to take care of his brother's wife, and he chose not to. One rabbi, present day, I like to call him Rabbi, Derek Flood, theologian, maybe a better picture. One theologian says this, and I think he says it really well. He says this: had he really cared for his new wife, he would have done what one does to procreate and not denied her the joys of having children. So the injunction really is against being mean-spirited. If you are in partnership with someone, be a full partner. But somehow the moral of the story evolved into not practicing a certain kind of wasting of bodily fluids, and it is a misinterpretation. Judaism is concerned with practicing community in the middle of brokenness. It is far more important not to be mean-spirited than to worry about the specifics and mechanics of procreation. I think this is so good. Yes, very wordy. That is Derek Flood in a nutshell. But I think I would argue really important what he says here. The idea here, think of community over yourself. That was the idea Israel's struggling with here. Think of community over yourself. It was about not being a good family member, basically, not being a good spouse, not being a good human. Onan misses this opportunity, doesn't he? He has the opportunity and he misses it. And again, whose child is this? Well, it's Judah's. Yeah. Verse 10. Now what he did was evil in the eyes of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Of course. So again, keep in mind, I read this more as more like metaphorical. I don't read this as literal, like God punished this guy, now he's punishing this guy. If you want to take it literal, then maybe they died of something. I have no idea. But the idea here, deeper than anything, is that we must learn to consider everyone in community. When we have the opportunity to do the good thing, we learn to do the good thing. Right? And he misses the opportunity to take care of the widow, right? His brother's wife, family. He doesn't actually do the good thing. And so, verse 11, we close with this. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, remain as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. For he said, lest he too die like his brothers. So first, notice this. How much trust does he have in his sons? Not a lot. This is not a good thing that Judah says here, which should fall on the parent, right? So Tamar went and she remained in her father's house. So notice this. Judah makes a mistake here. Judah is not where Judah should be yet, is he? And I like this. Again, think of the story in bookends. Judah here, he's not where Judah should be. Judah is still thinking selfishly. Has he grown some in the story? Yes. Have there been shifts? Yes. But the biggest shift is going to come at the end. And so Judah still, rather than doing the hard thing, rather than taking care of her, he sends her back to her father's home, which, by the way, when a bride is sent back to her father's home, this is a disgraceful action in Judaism during that time period. When you send them back, it's like saying the gift is not worth me. It's not worthy of me or my family, our time. It's not worthy of us. Yeah, this is a huge slap in the face. Judah, he did what his sons did, but he does it in a more conniving, like shifty way, right? And so Judah, instead of doing the hard thing, instead of taking care of his family, he shiftily just sends her back, which again is pretty disgraceful. He blew it, got it. He's not there yet, but he is shifting and growing, right? Think of bookends of the story. This is where he is now. Where is he going to be at the end? So Peter Enns says it this way. And again, Peter Enns is very concise. He and Derek Flood, very similar. Peter Enns just says it in a more concise way, easier to follow, I would argue, but Flood has its own positives as well. But this is what Peter Enns says about it. The lesson of Onan and Judah is that community needs to come first. The widow, orphan, and stranger must be taken care of, must be treated as family. I think that's so good. Growing up, my sister and I, we used to fight all the time. And we spent a lot of time at Grandma and Grandpa's house. And I remember when we would be chasing each other around the house, yelling at each other, kicking each other, punching each other, pulling hair, whatever the thing was we were doing. Grandma would do this. She would yell at us first to get our attention. And believe me, she could yell. And then she would say, "You stop it." She'd say, "We are family. Now act like it. We are family. Now act like it." And I remember like, "Oh, okay, yeah, we're family. We're family. Okay. It always hit me. We're family. Now act like it." Now, just yesterday, I'm at the store with my family. And my kid, my youngest, and my middle child, they're kind of going back and forth, and they're teasing each other, and the one's yelling back and forth. And I'm kind of watching it like, oh, here we go. Right? They're going to get into this argument right in the middle of, there's going to be a scene, and I just want to get through the line. But as this is happening, there's this man in this electric wheelchair behind me, and he's kind of smiling and laughing a little. And he says, my sister and I, we used to, he's older. He says, my sister and I, we used to fight like that. We used to fight all the time, he said. And then he got a little serious. And he said, man, what I wouldn't give to fight with her again. My wife and I said, what do you mean? He said, it's been 5 years since she's been gone. And he got kind of this lump in his throat. He started tearing up right there in the line. He says, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't miss her. I miss my family. I kind of looked at my kids as they're kind of going back and forth, and I thought, I am thankful that they're fighting. I'm thankful they're together. Thankful they'll be able to look back and say, I remember when we used to pull each other's hair in line at Fred Meyer. I looked at this moment and I just had to laugh. We're family. Act like it. We're family. We're family. The lesson for Israel, over and over again, what we're going to find in the story of Joseph, and specifically today, Judah, is this. When you are free, whether you're free or even in captivity, wherever you are, may you learn the lesson of Onan, right? Onan. Learn the lesson of Onan. And the lesson is take care of one another. We are family. Now act like it, right? Take care of one another. Someday we'll look back and we'll say, do you remember 20, 30 years ago? You realize where you are now, mom and dad are gone, whatever the thing is, you look back and you say, out of all of those things that seem so important, family, that's where the life was. It was in the family. And I think sometimes we miss that, don't we? The story of Onan and Judah here is that family comes first, right? Family, your family, act like it. We look out for one another like family. And that's really what it looks like to be in community. And so Judah is going to learn this the hard way. Everyone, that was a lot of fun today. Thank you for joining me for that. I started to consider, how do we take this home today? One of the themes that popped out for me, Casey Kestone, he is a marriage therapist, and I was reading this the other day, and I thought, this is kind of interesting stuff. He said, when you're in family, when you're dealing with your spouse, your kids, or whoever, we have to learn to fight fair. And so I read this piece that he wrote, and I thought, this is really good stuff, and I think it relates really well to family. Or anyone that has a spouse or a significant other or just close friends, we have to learn how to fight fair when we're in family. So the first thing he said is, when you're in a fight with family, friends, community, maintain control. Number one, he says, maintain control. Maintaining control during an argument, he says, is crucial to fighting fair. He says you need to learn to recognize when you're about to lose it. That's, I think, really important. You need to be aware enough to say, hey, listen, I might need a break, right? If you know you're about to lose control, walking away for a moment is going to cause you to not say things that are going to be hurtful or yell or whatever the thing is. You have to learn to maintain control. And I read that, I thought, yep, I got some work. I have to learn to maintain control. Number two, never interrupt. I like this one a lot. When you interrupt your partner, your friend, a community member, you are listening basically to respond, right? Rather than to understand. And so that's a big no-no in communication. We want to listen because we want to hear what they have to say, not so that we can quickly retaliate and be ready to throw the next grenade, right? That's combative. We want to move away from combative into listening and family kind of relationship. And so he says, again, never interrupt. Try to listen first before you form any kind of response. Number three, don't bring up the past. Right? This one's so hard, especially when there is something in the past to bring up. Don't bring up the past. He says couples will often bring up their partner's transgressions basically as a way to attack them during an argument. And so if a partner is continuously bringing up like old grudges, it basically means, according to Gaston, that there's an underlying problem of unforgiveness, and that needs to be resolved. That person has to let those things go. So if you find yourself bringing up stuff from the past all the time, it means you probably need to move through some things that you have not put away yet, that you haven't given up yet. You need to forgive. So bringing up past is because you still have past hurts. Number four, don't be critical. I like this one a lot too. When couples begin to criticize each other, they're no longer arguing constructively. And so learning to just, okay, I'm hearing you. I'm not going to be judgy Judgerson. I'm going to listen to you. What a great comment. Easier said than done, right? Of course. And then last, apologize. I love that he ends with this one. Usually you'd think, I apologize first, but he says you have to go through this process first before you can give a real apology. And so learning to recognize, take responsibility for when you've hurt your partner, he says, is really, really crucial. Learn to apologize. He even says this, we need a proper apology that acknowledges the hurt, the pain, that accepts responsibility, being held accountable, problem solves, and asks for forgiveness. So good. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this, everyone. This was so much fun for me. Please go to ethos-church.org/donate. Again, we spend so much time putting these things together every week. And so please journey with us. We are a tax-deductible organization. And so any of your donations are tax exempt. So make sure, journey with us, give those donations. It helps keep us alive in what we're doing every week. If you want to join us live online, Ethos Living Rooms is a great place to do so. And as always, hit subscribe, share these links. Let's continue to grow this channel. We are going to have over 2 years of content, over one book in the Bible. I cannot wait to continue sharing this with people. I think we're sitting on something really cool here. So everyone, thank you so much. Next week, we're going to finish off chapter 38 and the story of Judah as that first bookend. And I think you're going to see some interesting growth happen that's going to continue on and kind of set up where Joseph goes and how he changes. You're going to see some interesting foreshadowing. You're going to see some moments where you're like, hey, wait, are we talking about Joseph or is this Judah? Does Judah enter the story here? You're going to find really interesting stuff you may not have seen before. Can't wait to see you next week. Take care. See ya.